All right, let's jump into this deep dive on addiction and recovery.
Sounds good.
You've sent us some really interesting stuff this time.
Yeah.
We're talking ritual podcast, even some deeper dives from Dr. Anna Lemke over at Huberman Lab.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating mix.
And the cool thing is, this isn't just about like substance abuse.
Right.
We're going to be looking at everything from social media to just everyday habits we all struggle to break,
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we're going to uncover some surprising truths about ourselves today.
I think so too.
So where do we even begin with all of this?
Well, one thing that jumped out at me was just how widespread addiction might actually be.
Okay.
It's easy to think about the stereotypical image of substance abuse.
Right.
But when we actually start to broaden the definition of addiction,
Yeah.
it really makes you wonder, what behaviors are we all kind of hooked on, even if we don't realize it?
I like that.
In a way, we're all kind of addicts.
Yeah. And speaking of definitions, Dr. Lemke offers a really interesting one of these sources.
Okay.
She describes addiction as, and I'm quoting here, the continued compulsive use of a drug or behavior, despite harm to self and/or others.
Despite harm, that's the key part.
Yeah, that despite harm part really stood out to me because it suggests that we often know, like deep down, that something is bad for us.
Right.
But we still can't seem to stop.
Exactly. And that's the thing that I think challenges this idea that addiction is a choice.
Right.
If it were just as simple as choosing to stop, then nobody would be struggling with it, right?
Totally. It's way more complex than that.
Yeah.
And this is where I think things get really interesting.
Yeah.
Because Dr. Lemke goes on to explain that even things that seem super pleasurable, like playing video games or scrolling through social media, can actually trigger those same addictive pathways in the brain as something like heroin.
It's all about dopamine, that neurotransmitter associated with pleasure and reward.
Dopamine, such a buzzword these days, but it's for a good reason, right?
Oh, definitely. It plays such a huge role in how our brains experience pleasure.
So how does it actually work? Like, how does dopamine turn into addiction?
Well, Dr. Lemke uses this really helpful analogy of a balance scale.
Okay, I like analogies.
Yeah, me too. They help make these complex topics a little bit easier to grasp.
For sure.
So imagine your brain has this balance scale, and when you do something pleasurable, like eating a delicious meal or having a good conversation, the scale tips to one side, towards pleasure.
Okay, got it.
But then when that activity stops, the scale tips back to the other side, toward pain.
Interesting.
And this creates this urge to re-engage in that pleasurable activity to tip the scale back towards pleasure again.
So we're constantly chasing that initial high.
In a way, yes.
And then there's the inevitable come down after, right?
Exactly.
I know, I definitely feel that, especially after spending way too much time on social media.
Happens to the best of us.
You end up feeling kind of empty and you just need to find something else, another dopamine hit to feel okay again.
It's like you're chasing that initial high, but the more you chase it, the harder it becomes to reach.
And that's when it can become problematic, right?
Exactly.
And Dr. Lemke points out something really interesting here. She says that this chronic exposure to those highly stimulating activities can actually lower our baseline dopamine levels over time. Okay, so explain that.
So basically, it's like our brain gets used to this constant influx of dopamine.
Right.
And as a result, it becomes less sensitive to it.
So we need more and more stimulation to get the same level of pleasure.
Yeah. And that can lead to a state called anhedonia.
Okay, anhedonia. I've heard of that, but I don't really know what it is.
It's essentially the inability to experience pleasure from things that used to bring you joy.
Whoa, that's kind of scary.
Yeah, it can be a real struggle because it's like the world starts to lose its color, its vibrancy.
Like everything just feels blah.
Exactly, and it can make it even harder to break free from those addictive patterns because nothing else seems enjoyable anymore.
So it's this vicious cycle.
It really is.
Yeah. And it makes me think about the personal stories that we're going to be diving into today.
Yeah, those are powerful.
Those interviews from the Ritual podcast with people like Dan Perez and Jeff Grant who's struggled with opioid addiction.
They really put a human face on this issue.
They do, and Dan's story is particularly fascinating because he was what you might call a high-functioning addict.
Right. He had a demanding job as an editor, but at the same time, he was battling this incredibly powerful opioid addiction.
Yeah, it just shows how addiction can affect anyone, regardless of their background or profession.
It really highlights how cunning and baffling addiction can be, how it can just creep into your life without you even realizing it.
And his story really illustrates the lengths that people will go to just to satisfy those cravings.
Yeah, it becomes all-consuming.
He talks about how getting his next fix became his primary occupation, even more important than his actual job.
It's like the addiction hijacks your brain's reward system and makes it the top priority no matter what the consequences are.
Wow. Yeah, it's really powerful stuff.
And then we have Jeff Grant's story, which really delves into this concept of hitting rock bottom.
That's a term we hear a lot, but it's not always easy to define, is it?
Not really, but Jeff's experience really brings it to life. He was a successful lawyer who ended up attempting suicide before he finally sought help for his addiction.
It's heartbreaking, but it also raises some important questions.
Yeah, like whether there always needs to be this extreme level of crisis before someone can change.
Right. It makes you wonder if there are ways to intervene earlier to help people recognize the problem and seek help before things spiral completely out of control.
I think that's a crucial point, and it's something we need to be talking more about.
Absolutely, because early intervention can make such a huge difference.
And one thing that Jeff's story really highlights is the power of community support in recovery.
Yeah, he credits his involvement in 12-step programs as a key factor in his ability to turn his life around.
It's amazing how those programs can provide such a strong sense of belonging and support.
I mean, they've been around for so long, there must be something to them, right?
Well, they offer this structured framework for recovery with a strong emphasis on accountability, peer support, and working through those 12 steps to address the underlying causes of addiction.
So it's not just about stopping the behavior, it's about addressing the deeper issues.
Exactly. It's about healing on multiple levels.
And it's incredible that even after facing serious consequences, like a prison sentence in Jeff's case, long-term sobriety is still possible.
It gives me so much hope.
Me too.
It shows that no matter how far down the path of addiction someone might be, there's always a chance to turn things around.
Yeah, it's never too late.
Never too late.
But it's important to acknowledge that recovery is a journey, and there are going to be challenges along the way.
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges is the risk of relapse.
That's something that comes up a lot in these sources, doesn't it?
It does, and one of the guests on Rich Roll's podcast, a friend of his who has been sober for 40 years, he shared this really powerful analogy.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
He said, no matter how far you drive, you're always the same distance from the ditch.
Whoa, that's deep. I like that.
Yeah, it really gets you thinking.
It reminds us that no matter how much progress we make, we're always vulnerable.
Exactly. There's always that potential to slip back into old patterns.
It's like you always have to be aware of that edge, even when you think you're far from it.
Right, and Dr. Lemke adds another layer to this by explaining that relapse triggers aren't always negative.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, we tend to think of triggers as being stressful or difficult emotions, but she points out that even positive events, like celebrations or achievements, can sometimes throw us off balance.
That makes sense. It's like when you let your guard down.
Exactly.
So it's about staying vigilant.
Yeah, self-awareness is crucial throughout the entire recovery journey.
Not just in the beginning when maybe the cravings are the strongest.
Right, it's an ongoing process.
It makes you wonder, do these principles only apply to people who identify as like addicts with a capital A?
That's a really good question.
Could it be that these same patterns are playing out in all of our lives, even if we don't struggle with substance abuse?
Well, that's something we're going to be exploring further, because you're right.
Okay, good, because I feel like there's something there.
There is. And Dr. Judd Brewer, who specializes in habit change and mindfulness, he argues that we can become addicted to anything that triggers that dopamine reward pathway.
So we're talking about anything that gives us that initial hit of dopamine and then leaves us wanting more.
Precisely.
It's almost like a cycle of chasing that fleeting feeling of reward, even if it comes at a cost.
Yeah, and that cost can manifest in so many different ways. It can be our time, our energy, our relationships, even our health.
Right. It's not always obvious at first.
And that's why Dr. Brewer emphasizes the importance of becoming more mindful of these patterns.
Okay, so how do we actually do that?
Well, he encourages us to pay close attention to the actual experience of engaging in our habits.
Like really be present in the moment.
Exactly. It's about asking ourselves, how am I actually feeling right now?
Instead of just going through the motions.
Right, because we might discover that the things we think are bringing us pleasure are actually causing more harm than good.
It's about becoming aware of the consequences of our actions, both positive and negative.
Exactly.
It's like that saying, awareness is the first step to change.
It really is.
And, this brings us to what might be considered like the elephant in the room, or maybe the smartphone in our pocket.
Social media.
Yeah, social media.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Dr. Lemke doesn't hold back in these sources. She calls it a drug, engineered to keep us hooked.
I mean, it's true.
I know, I could definitely see that.
Right.
With those notifications and the endless scrolling and the constant comparisons.
It's all designed to keep us engaged and coming back for more.
And it preys on the dopamine reward system we were talking about earlier, right?
Absolutely. Those likes and comments give us those little bursts of pleasure, those dopamine hits.
Which keep us coming back for more, even if we know it's not really serving us.
And it can create this sort of narcissistic preoccupation.
Okay, I haven't heard that term before.
It's basically this idea that we become so focused on how we appear online, on curating this perfect image,
Oh, I get it.
that we lose touch with our authentic selves.
Have you ever felt that pressure?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's something we can all relate to on some level.
It's like you feel like you need to present this certain version of yourself online, even if it doesn't quite match up with reality.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in this culture of self-promotion and comparison.
It's like everyone's trying to be the best version of themselves, but it's not even real.
It's a highlight reel, not real life.
It's so important to remember that.
It is.
And it's just incredible how these things that seem so harmless, like scrolling through our feeds or playing video games, can actually have such a profound impact on our brains and our well-being.
They really can.
It makes you stop and think, what am I actually doing with my time and energy?
It raises some important questions about how we can reclaim control and find more balance in a world that's seemingly designed for addiction.
It's a lot to think about, but it's important stuff.
Definitely.
So I'm really looking forward to digging into this more.
Me too.
This has been such a great conversation so far.
Yeah, really eye-opening.
I feel like we've only scratched the surface.
We have.
But I think we've laid a solid foundation for understanding just how complex this topic really is.
I agree.
So I'm excited to continue this conversation and explore some potential solutions in the next part.
That sounds great.
All right, we'll be back soon with part 2 of this deep dive on addiction and recovery.
See you then.
Take care. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in part 1.
We have.
But now I'm kind of ready to shift gears a bit and talk about solutions.
Okay.
You know, we've explored some pretty challenging territory, but now I'm curious to dive into, like, the practical side of things.
Right.
How can we actually use these insights to reclaim control and create a more fulfilling life?
Yeah, a life that isn't dominated by those addictive patterns we've been talking about. Well, I think it's important to emphasize that, recovery isn't like a quick fix.
Right.
It's a journey, not a destination.
Yeah.
And one of the guests on Rich Roll's podcast, Mishka Shubali, he's a musician who's been sober for 8 years, he offered a perspective that I found really helpful.
Okay.
He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it's a miracle that people in recovery are not engaging in their addictive behaviors daily.
That's interesting.
Like, it's not about pretending those cravings don't exist. It's about learning to manage them.
I like that.
Yeah, it takes the pressure off needing to be perfect.
It does.
And instead focuses on developing those healthy coping mechanisms.
To navigate those inevitable challenges.
Right.
Yeah, because those urges, they're part of being human.
They are.
But we have the power to choose how we respond to them.
Exactly. We don't have to be slaves to our cravings.
So how do we actually do that? Like, how do we manage those cravings in a healthy way?
Well, Dr. Lemking offers some practical advice here. She talks about the importance of finding meaning in those everyday tasks.
Even the mundane ones.
Even the mundane ones.
The ones we often try to avoid.
Yeah, because in a world that's so saturated with all these dopamine spiking activities, it's easy to lose sight of those simple pleasures in life.
Oh, totally. It's like we're constantly chasing the next hit of excitement.
Right, and we forget to appreciate the beauty of just being present in the moment.
You know, I've been trying to be more mindful of this lately.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like instead of just rushing through the dishes or scrolling through my phone while I walk the dog, I'm trying to actually tune into those experiences.
That's great.
It's not always easy, but when I do manage to stay present,
Yeah.
it's amazing how much more enjoyable those simple activities become.
It's about shifting your perspective from what do I want to do to what needs to be done.
Interesting.
Dr. Lemke uses this great example of picking up trash on your neighbor's lawn.
Okay.
Like, it's not glamorous or exciting, but it's a simple act of service.
Right.
That can actually bring a sense of satisfaction.
A sense of purpose.
Exactly.
I love that example.
It really highlights how we can find meaning in unexpected places.
Yeah, even in those tasks that we might normally consider chores.
Right, and this ties back to Dr. Brewer's emphasis on mindfulness.
Oh, yeah, he talked about that a lot.
He did. And by paying attention to our direct experience without judgment, we can start to see the true consequences of our habits.
Both positive and negative.
Exactly. He uses this example of smokers who, when they really focus on the taste and feeling of smoking, they realize how unpleasant it actually is.
It's like we have to feel it to believe it.
Sometimes, yeah.
And I think that applies to so many areas of our lives.
I agree.
It's easy to get caught up in our thoughts and beliefs about what will make us happy.
Yeah, but sometimes we need to tap into the wisdom of our bodies
Our direct
to
experience.
see things more clearly.
And that makes me think about Dr. Lemke's point about identifying the root causes of our addictive patterns.
Oh, yeah, that's huge.
She talks about how addiction is often an attempt to soothe pain.
Right, whether it's from childhood trauma or societal pressures or even just like the general anxieties of modern life.
Exactly. And this really aligns with Dr. Gabor Mate's perspective.
Oh, yeah, he's big on that.
He argues that addiction isn't about the substance or behavior itself,
Right.
but rather the underlying emotional pain that people are trying to escape.
He believes our society often overlooks the impact of early childhood experiences.
Yeah, on brain development and mental health.
Exactly.
It's not about excusing addictive behaviors,
Yeah, not at all.
but about understanding the complex factors that contribute to them
Right, it's about cultivating compassion.
for ourselves and others who are struggling.
Exactly, because shame and isolation, they only fuel addiction.
But connection and empathy, those are the things that create the conditions for healing.
And that brings us back to Dr. Lemke's advice on finding those healthy and sustainable ways to cope with difficult emotions.
Right, so we need to build resilience.
Develop coping mechanisms that don't involve escaping or numbing ourselves.
So things like mindfulness, exercise, spending time in nature, connecting with loved ones,
All those things.
those are powerful ways to regulate our nervous systems.
And process emotions in a healthy way.
It's about finding activities and practices that help us connect with a sense of peace and purpose.
Yeah, and those things don't have to be grand gestures.
Right.
Like Dr. Lemke says, it can be as simple as taking a few deep breaths when you're feeling overwhelmed.
Or calling a friend when you're feeling lonely
Exactly. Small, consistent actions
can make a big difference.
over time.
And this makes me think about Kara's story from the Texas Pictures documentaries video you shared.
Oh, yeah. What a powerful story.
She talks about how recovery is ultimately about alignment with our true selves
It's about letting go of those false promises of addiction.
and embracing who we're meant to be.
Exactly.
Her story is so inspiring. It reminds us that recovery isn't just about abstaining from a substance or behavior,
Right.
but about rediscovering our passions,
Our values.
the things that truly bring us joy.
It's about reclaiming your life and creating something meaningful.
It's a journey,
It is, and there will be challenges along the way.
but it's a journey worth taking.
Absolutely.
And, while each person's path to recovery is going to be unique,
Of course.
there are some common threads running through these stories that we can all learn from.
Definitely.
And I think these insights offer a roadmap.
For creating healthier habits and living more fulfilling lives.
Exactly. And that's a great segue into part 3, I think.
Oh, yeah.
We can delve into those common threads and explore some specific strategies for putting these insights into action.
That sounds great.
All right, welcome back to the final part of our deep dive on addiction and recovery.
It's been quite a journey so far, hasn't it?
It really has. We've explored the science, those powerful personal stories, and even some practical strategies for change.
A lot to unpack.
It is, and I'm really curious to hear more about those common threads you mentioned.
Oh,
Those insights that can help us all create healthier habits and live more authentically, not just people struggling with addiction.
you're right. Those themes are relevant for everyone.
Yeah, so what are some of the big takeaways that really stand out to you?
Well, one of the most striking themes is the power of honesty.
Honesty, huh?
It might seem obvious, but it's really crucial, and it makes me think of Jeff Grant's story.
Yeah, he talked about how hitting rock bottom forced him to confront the truth about his addiction.
And the harm it had caused to himself and others.
Yeah, it was obviously painful for him to face that.
It was, but it was also the turning point in his recovery.
But he had to acknowledge the reality of his situation before he could actually start to heal.
And what's interesting is that Dr. Lemke explains the neurological basis for this.
Okay, how so?
She talks about how truth-telling actually strengthens the connections in our brains between the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for decision-making and impulse control,
Okay.
and the limbic system, which is involved in emotions and reward.
So honesty isn't just like a moral virtue. It's actually rewiring our brains for greater resilience and self-control.
That's right. It's pretty amazing.
It is. And another theme that comes up again and again is the importance of community.
Oh, that's huge.
We hear from so many people in recovery about how connecting with others who understand their struggles has been transformative.
Absolutely. It's like having that network of people who get it, who've been there. It makes all the difference.
Yeah, like Jeff Grant talked about how 12-step programs gave him that sense of belonging and support.
Right. A safe space to share his struggles without judgment.
And Mishka Shubaly mentioned how his friendships, especially with ritual, have helped him stay sober.
Because shame and isolation, those things just fuel addiction.
Yeah, they keep us stuck in those negative patterns.
But connection and empathy, those create the conditions for healing.
It's a reminder that we're not meant to go through these challenges alone.
We need each other.
We do. And this brings me to another important insight that keeps popping up, which is the need to find joy in the simple things.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Dr. Lemke talks about this a lot, right?
She does. It's about cultivating an appreciation for those everyday moments rather than constantly chasing that next dopamine hit.
Like instead of seeking out those big highs and lows, it's about finding contentment in the little things.
Exactly. She recommends intentionally engaging in activities that bring genuine pleasure, whether it's spending time in nature, listening to music, or connecting with loved ones.
Yeah, those simple things that often get overlooked.
Right. It's about rediscovering those natural sources of joy that don't require external validation or constant stimulation.
It's so important in today's world where we're constantly bombarded with messages telling us we need to be doing more, achieving more, consuming more.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in that hustle mentality and lose sight of what truly matters.
Absolutely. And speaking of nourishing our souls, another theme that emerges is the importance of self-compassion.
Oh, self-compassion is key, especially when it comes to addiction and recovery.
Mishka Shubaly reminded us the cravings are normal, even for people who've been sober for years.
They are. It's not about beating ourselves up for having those urges.
It's about developing those healthy coping mechanisms to manage them.
We need to be gentle with ourselves, especially when we're struggling.
Because recovery is a process, and there are going to be setbacks along the way.
There will be, and Amy Dresner, another guest on Ritual's podcast, she talked about how important it is to avoid getting discouraged by those setbacks.
Yeah, she said it's important to remember that each day is a new opportunity to start fresh.
That's a powerful reminder.
It is. It's about learning from those experiences and using them as fuel for growth.
To become even stronger and more resilient.
And it strikes me that these themes, honesty, community, self-compassion, finding joy in the simple things, they're not just relevant for people in recovery from addiction.
You're right. They're universal principles that can benefit all of us.
Regardless of our struggles, they're a roadmap for creating healthier habits, breaking free from patterns that aren't serving us, and just living more authentic and fulfilling lives.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it.
It's been such a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
Likewise.
I feel like I've gained a whole new understanding of addiction, recovery, and just the incredible power of human resilience.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
We'll see you next time.